65% of companies that fail because of people issues. All the successful companies today, their most successful years were post the founder leaving the company. We need to figure out how to build better leaders in this world.
Hey, Martin, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Steve.
So we were just having like a little chat before. Really cool to hear about some of the things you're up to. I will jump ahead. I actually mentioned that I was thrilled you used the terminology of a serial immigrant. You've traveled around a little bit. You've also got a lot of accolades, and you're pretty much connected to a rather well-known company called Google. Now, you are the creator of Google's Effective Founders Project. Now, what I like about this is I'm going to ask you to explain it more, but you're a global research program that uses people analytics to basically source out what makes a founder great and successful. What does that mean?
So, you can go to all these conferences and hear a successful entrepreneur talk about the 5 things they've learned, the 10 things they've learned. And what you might find actually as you put those lists together, some of them will contradict each other. And then you have the problem of what some researchers will call survivor bias, which is, well, you shouldn't just look at the successful ones and see what they did. You should also look at the people who failed and see if they did the same and failed anyway. So what we try to do with the Effective Founders Project is we try to scan the globe. And so this study now has entrepreneurs from about 70 countries. And we look at the best and the worst in the data set. And then we ask the question, what is different between these two groups? What did the best founders do differently that really made them successful? And we do that research in-house at Google, but we've also done some collaborations with Wharton to then validate some of our findings. And so that's what we share with the world. And we've shared that through a report a few years ago and now a book that's coming out soon.
Yeah, we're going to get into the book, the Bonfire Moment. I actually want to get into that. But having Wharton, having Google, I'm assuming, and I hate to do that, so I'm asking the question, you must have access to some pretty incredible entrepreneurs from around the globe.
Well, and it's of all different like company sizes too. It's seed stage startups all the way to IPO'd startups. And I'll tell you the story of how we kind of built out this network. You know, we have an accelerator program at Google called Google for Startups Accelerator. And about 9 years ago, when I was trying to plug in and spend some time with this group, I realized that they had a lot of really cool stuff around machine learning and sales and marketing and all these other topics, and nothing on people and culture. And so I told the team, hey, I want to get involved, but let me just do the research a little bit. And so I go into the literature and try to understand, well, is this a problem in entrepreneurial environments? And it turns out there's a couple of decades of venture capital studies that ask investors, think of your portfolio and think of the most recent companies that closed shop and that failed. What were the few reasons why they failed? And it turned out that the number one reason why companies fail are people issues. 65% of companies that fail because of people issues. And so based on that insight, we built a very basic program. It did pretty well, that it eventually scaled and reached founders in about 70 countries. And through that program, we would run what we call a 360-degree feedback survey, where we ask employees, co-founders, investors to provide feedback on these participants of these workshops. And we realized after scaling this program for many years, we were sitting on a goldmine of data. And so we thought, let's just do the analytics on it and see what we can find, validate it through Wharton. And that's kind of the Effective Founders Project.
Now, you mentioned that you were a serial immigrant, and we joked about it earlier as we were chatting that I'm kind of one of those as well. I just didn't have a cool statement for it. You've traveled a lot, and here we are, the pair of us in America, but not from America, talking about immigration. How important is the culture of where you came from versus the entrepreneurial mindset. You know, is a entrepreneur in Asia, Europe, different to maybe an entrepreneur in, I don't know, Canada or Mexico, based on the culture? Does the culture give them an advantage or a disadvantage?
So there's actually some really good research on this, where they look at cultural norms in countries and they try to understand, does that impact entrepreneurial activity in those countries? And I'll fail to cite who specifically did the study. I believe they were some folks from Wharton as well, but essentially what they showed was that when you have an environment that, has a combination of supportive governmental structures, but also culturally, if there's very high power distance where people aren't ready to defy authority and speak truth to power, or where there's a very big collectivist kind of culture where to stick out of the pack is seen as like socially unacceptable. In those environments, you'll see a lot less entrepreneurial activity. And in environments where, wow, you really respect the individuality and someone who kind of breaks out from the norm, then you'll actually see a lot more, new companies get established, more entrepreneurial activity. So it absolutely impacts this. And obviously it's a multifactorial problem, right? There's a national culture, but there's also kind of your proclivities as an individual. There's your educational, but there are all these the amount of financial cushions you have, all of these things kind of contribute to entrepreneurial activity.
You talk about the culture. Now, there can be the culture of how, and you say about standing out. There's a lot of, I told you earlier that I was raised a lot of time up in Asia. I spent time in Hong Kong and Bangkok, and I traveled extensively throughout North and Southeast Asia. And the relationship they had to money and exposing their wealth is very different to other areas. You hang out in Venice Beach and you'll have a billionaire that looks as though he's homeless, and then you'll have someone in Korea and every single item of clothing that they're wearing will have a logo on it. So there's different relationships to money and success across, but also we've got the culture of today and viewership. And of course, coming from Google as well, we've got a lot of pressure from social platforms, the Metas, the Instagrams, the TikToks, all of those, that they are also creating a culture of people being a little bit frightened to step out with their ideas, or frightened. Like the classic one is, you've saved up all your life, you finally get the car you want, you stick a picture of it up on, your favorite social platform, and you get haters turning around going, oh, you just rented that. So we've got an internet culture as well. How important is how they view the social culture impacting on that entrepreneurial bias?
Coming back a little bit, I'll answer the question in a sec, but coming back a little bit to your observations on money and how people, I guess, display wealth, I think a lot of that has to do with whether it's new wealth or old wealth.
Yes.
I mean, there's this funny kind of aphorism that goes something like, money talks, but wealth whispers, which I love. And so true wealth, it doesn't get carried on your, shoulder. What I've found, and you have to ask the question, why is it that in America and specifically in Silicon Valley, where I am at the moment, like, why is it that there is such a proliferation of innovation, and there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity that's very inspiring out here, and the social norms are definitely a big part of it. One thing that I have discovered, though, that is almost universally similar across all startup ecosystems we've brought a lot of our work to, is there's a brag culture that exists in the startup ecosystem. And I think for good or for bad, I think there is the good side of it is it creates this environment where people can really dream big and hear a lot of people who are going for really ambitious goals and who are, who tell the story that they're crushing it. And then for bad, because I think when those stories get told, and sometimes, the difficulty of the journey is masked, I think a lot of people then also come back home thinking, wow, like if everyone's crushing it, like what's wrong with me? surely I'm destined for failure, but that's what psychologists would call pluralistic ignorance, which is, I think that the social norm is to project a certain way. And so I project that way, which continues to sustain that social norm when deep inside we all believe that I'm not. And that's where you get a lot of the imposter phenomenon, really, really prevalent in this, among founders.
Let's pick on that for a second, because more and more I've been hearing about imposter syndrome. And Alex Sharfin actually said it beautifully. He said, imposters don't have imposter syndrome. And I really liked that. But why do you find that with founders, no matter what level, and I've noticed this in the people I've worked with, they could be very successful, but they'll walk into a room of other successful entrepreneurs and they will get imposter syndrome, even though they're running a massive company. Why is that so rampant in today's world?
It's the human condition, Steve. So in the book, we talk about this moment where it's the first time we're working with a unicorn founder, a founder of this really big company. And we were pretty sure there was nothing we could really share with this person that would really help them because they were wildly successful. And he said at the end of the workshop, when we said, "Hey, thank you for being so receptive and open," he said the following. He said, "I am no longer a seed stage founder. I know I need help." And I thought, what an odd thing to say, because it's the early stage founder that actually needs the help. It's the more successful founder that maybe needs less of the help. And so we go into our data set, and we try to understand if we were to plot out people based on how effective they are and how confident they were in their skills. We actually found that in the data where at very early stages of skill, the confidence is highest. And then as they get better, their confidence actually comes down. It eventually goes back up, but never at the same height as when they first began. And when you look at that data, you think, okay, well, one, you need that overconfidence at the start of the journey, right? If you and I knew exactly what it took to do things, if you knew the exact cost of it, you would never begin, right? You almost have to delude yourself. That's right. You have to delude yourself to think that it's possible. You get into it, and then sunk cost fallacy kicks in where, I put in so much, I've gone this far, I might as well go further. And that's how we get like human progress. So it's baked into our evolution somehow to be an optimistic species. And then when we start getting better at it, we realize, wow, this is what great looks like. I am so far from great. And then that's where you get a lot of this imposter syndrome. And by the way, imposter syndrome was first studied among high-performing women and I think in the 60s or 70s. And somehow over the decades, we've assumed that this was unique to females. Well, the research shows it's actually not the case. Men experience this just as much as women do. The problem is that, and this is where the male norms really hurt men. They just don't talk about it. They're a lot more private about it. They try to project strength. That's the expectation of society, and as a result, you see a lot of problems around mental health. You see a lot of suicidal instances, hospitalizations, substance abuse is very high among this population.
Yeah, it is tough, and it's getting larger. I think the best way to handle it is to be aware of it, and I think as it's becoming more visible, we need to talk about it, because, as you say, if you don't combat it, handle it, recognize it, it can mentally hurt you.
And I will go one step further, and this is what the research shows that helps imposter syndrome. It's to be aware of it, but also to normalize it, to realize that this is actually a very normal experience. And just knowing that most people actually experience this already helps.
Yeah. A friend of mine once said to me that if you walk into a room and you feel as though you've got imposter syndrome, you're in the right room.
That's right.
No one wants to be in the room where I don't want to be in a room where I'm the smartest person. That's for sure. Talking about
can I quickly add to that, Steve? I think there's an important point here. There's some emerging research around imposter syndrome that looks at what are the benefits of actually carrying that self-doubt with you.
All right.
And it's been studied in places like the medical system where doctors or nurses who don't feel fully proficient, they'll actually be more inclined to like ask the patient, if they're doing okay, consult others and ask for help. And the standard of care increases as a result. You'll see a lot of like people approach, let's say, test taking or preparing for the Olympics, and they'll put in a lot more effort to prepare because they're worried that they won't perform. And that alone already improves their performance, right? And so it's actually not something you want to completely get rid of. In fact, overconfidence has many downsides, including it's been studied that CEOs who are overconfident will overpay for acquisitions. They will, and therefore the stock valuation of their companies come down when they make these over purchased acquisitions. So we don't want overconfidence either, is the point.
I'm interrupting this podcast for 35 seconds to give you more value. If you are an ambitious entrepreneur looking for the opportunity in everything you come across, don't just listen to this podcast. Imagine taking part in these conversations every week. Imagine having a new network of creative and disruptive entrepreneurs to support and push you into becoming the person you can be. With this high level and exclusive community, it exists. Head to simsdistillery.com to learn more. I love the way you've reframed imposter syndrome. That's good. I'm going to hold on to that reframe and I'm going to steal it. I'll give you credit, but I'm going to be telling more people about it. I think the more that we can actually look at that imposter syndrome as a sign that we are doing well to over prepare, I think is smart. I think it's like nerves. When you get a boxing ring, when you're racing cars or motorcycles, you get those nerves, but they keep you alive and they keep you alert. And when you step into a boxing ring and you're a little bit cocky, that's the moment you're probably going to get a smack in the nose. So I think it's a very wise thing. I said about being smart. You're kind of smart yourself. And in 2023, the Aspen Institute recognized you as the First Movers Fellow, honoring your work at Google. The following year, and I think this is just a cool title, in 2024, you identified in the Thinkers 50 radar list. Now, what made you actually go, well, hang on a minute, I want to dedicate my life to understanding the how and the why of achievers? What was that bridge like for you?
It comes back to very early in growing up where I realized that there was so much pain around me. And as I started my career as a product manager, I realized there's so much pain in the corporate world. Like, we need to figure out how to build better leaders in this world. And so that felt like a real mission for me. And I come to Google 10 years ago thinking, I'll be here for 2 years. Figure out kind of how to build really positive cultures that are also really effective, and go out and share, what I can with the world and help as many companies as possible. Somehow through this work with the Effective Founders Project and our Startup Accelerator, it's given me a chance to really, reach out to many other companies outside of Google. But it's really been a mission because I look at, we spend most of our waking hours at work. And it kind of sucks for most people. And I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we make work less sucky for a good amount of people in the world?
Now, let's look at your early stage years. Did you come from a successful family? Did you have CEOs in your family?
So I've been very lucky to have a dad who has had a really great career. My grandparents were not well-to-do. They worked really hard to put their kids to school. They valued education a tremendous amount. So they left nothing for the kids in terms of inheritance, except for a good name. My grandpa would tell me a good name and good education. So my dad actually had a chance to graduate from his undergrad, with honors, and then went on at some point to do an MBA at Harvard. But he comes back to the Philippines and then becomes like a chief executive in some of the biggest conglomerates in the Philippines. And so very early on, I was exposed to the kind of work ethic that, a middle class person who tries to maximize every opportunity and just try to do their best, because you don't have a wide network, a lot of financial cushions to really support you through it. All you had was what was up here, and the energy you put in doing the work well.
Now, we were talking before about culture, the dedication. You, like my family, have been able to see the ups and downs of my entrepreneurial journey. And my son, Henry, openly used to say that he wants to be an engineer. He doesn't want to see him going through what we went through. One of the other things that we were talking about, overconfidence. One of the other things I feel that every entrepreneur needs, apart from that early stage overconfidence that helps them get through, is an ignorance to failure, an ignorance to the fact that it could possibly go wrong. And when you're growing, as you say quite openly, if you saw a checklist of all the shit you're going to get coming at you, so then it really comes down, and I would be an idiot not to ask this, with all of the people that you've spoken with all of the data you've collected, give us 1, 2, or 3 things that you found was a common theme between all of the most successful founders out there.
I love that. So the first thing I would say is they do not succumb to the trap of speed. And we talk about this in the book. The trap of speed is when you have really immediate goals and really need to launch a product, meet investor expectations, do all of this. Certain things you will deprioritize and get sloppy on. What we found is that founders who really do succeed and build companies that last and that sustain understand that there are some very early decisions you make that might not have immediate impact, but will be so important down the line. Some of those include, who do you partner with? Getting sloppy with your business partner is one big error. We know from the research that most people will build a company with friends and family. It's at a time where no one else knows your name or sees any traction. So the only people who would go along with you are people who know and love you, i.e. your friends and family. Well, those are the most unstable relationships when we look at the data, partly because that relationship is very expensive. And so to have the tough conversations is a lot harder. That's one sloppy thing that tends to happen early on that kills a lot of these companies. Building the right culture, there's some really interesting research from Stanford, a couple of decades now. They followed some 200 something companies over a span of 8 years. And they tried to understand, how did they hire people? How did they organize the team? How did they micromanage the process? Did they give a lot of autonomy? And what the study basically shows is that some of those early decisions that you make at a very young stage of your company can predict things like your chances of closing up or failing, your chances of going public. And if you went public, the chance of increasing your market capitalization. And by the way, you might say, well, give me that study and let me retrofit my organization based on what the study recommends. Well, the study shows that if you do that, that actually is a formula for failure, where companies at midstream shifted the way they operated in a dramatic way actually failed even more, because then the people who are used to operating that way all leave, and it creates kind of this war zone in the company. So early decisions are really important. So that's the number one thing. The second thing I would say is we talk in the book about the trap of the inner circle, which is because, again, you co-found with people you trust, and really it's a human condition to build companies with people who are like you in many ways. That comes with some downsides. These teams become resistant to people who disagree with one another. There's a lot more groupthink that comes into play. When we study this among founders, we ask them, how important is it to invite disagreement? Something like 4% of founders we surveyed would say, well, that's definitely important to be a good, to be effective. When we ask the people around them, it's like 15 times more that they agree that this is important. And so there's somehow a blind spot here where founders don't fully value, kind of valuing disagreement. There's a really interesting story, if I can do a bit of a sidebar here, in the history of computer science. There's a character in the history books. His name is Bob Taylor. Bob Taylor was a lab manager in Xerox PARC. Xerox PARC is one of the most prolific in places where you get the personal computer. You get essentially the innovations that fuel the Apple computer, Pixar, Adobe, 3Com. So much innovation came in this place. And he says the following. He says, in any team, there will always be two kinds of arguments. There's always a class 1 disagreement and a class 2 disagreement. A class 1 disagreement is where I take your argument, Steve, I represent it in the weakest way possible, and I refute it that way. And that's kind of like a straw man argument. A class 2 disagreement is where I take your argument and I find the best parts of it, and I share it back with you in a way that you're satisfied with my understanding of your argument. And then I go about debating it. Now, he says that it's not his job to resolve all disagreements in a team. His job is to make sure that every class 1 disagreement graduates into a class 2 disagreement. If you do that, then you can overcome this trap of the inner circle. And you can kind of have better decisions, and you increase the chances of you making better decisions and executing really effectively. The last thing, and we've talked about it, so I'll go quick on this last thing, is overcoming the trap of confidence, which is we are deluded to think that as I get better, I get more confident, and it's the reverse. And people who feel this self-doubt think, wow, this is a sign of future failure. It's actually a sign of growth. And successful people we know understand this, and they are able to push through that.
Oh, that's fantastic, especially leading that, finishing off with the confidence factor. I think that's going to shock a lot of people. I think they think that the more the company grows, the bigger it grows, the more the bank account grows, the more confidence they will get, where in fact they've got more to handle. They're being introduced to more aspects of a company and what goes on with a large company that they weren't aware of when it was a small company. Now, You've got this book come out. How long has it been taking you to do? And it's called The Bonfire Moment. First of all, I take it they can get it on the usual suspects, Amazon and all those places.
That's right.
All right. So how long did it take you to do it, and why did you do it?
Too long, man. I mean, the dream first began when we first started to run these workshops around the world, which started about 9 years ago now. But really, the book itself, we got serious about writing up a proposal and then kind of writing the actual book. I'd say about 2 years ago. And look, like I work full time at Google. I teach as well at Stanford in the winter term. So this was kind of fitting it through the things. Why did we do it? Because we saw a lot of success in running these workshops with founders within the closed walls of our accelerator program. We just wanted to give it to as many entrepreneurs, as many teams and startup founders as possible for as free as possible. I mean, you'd have to buy the book, but really all the tools that we've road tested around the world, we put in the book and we share it in the form of, the book has 2 parts. The first part is all the analytics and all the things we've learned and kind of the state-of-the-art research around entrepreneurship and how you be successful there. The second part is we take the workshop that we've run and we've condensed it into one day with all the tools and instructions that teams can just pick up, read the book, and then run these workshops themselves and get the value that we've seen a lot of entrepreneurs around the world have valued from it. Oh,
that's beautiful. I love that. Because let's be serious. It'd be a better place if more people had a successful mindset than a hatred mindset. And at this moment in time, we've got a lot of people out there that are just cynical and scared. If you can give them some positivity and let them know that their feeling of that imposter is actually a sign of growth. I think that's fantastic. So with the book out, and we'll put a link in the book to everything. What's next? I've never heard of anyone that's released a book without thinking of, well, okay, hopefully we're going to, what's next for you?
Well, before the book one was done, I actually started to compile a list of book two ideas. And so we'll see. We'll see when book two, if and when book two comes out. But there's a lot in this space of like how to get business leaders and especially like innovative tech leaders, how to help them succeed. I think there's still many unanswered questions. I'll share with you one, and I don't know that this will be the book two, but it might as well be. If you were to ask the question, what's the difference between a CEO in a Fortune 500 company and a CEO in a startup, in a young entrepreneurial venture? One big difference is when you're successful as a Fortune 500 CEO, you tend to actually stay on as CEO. It's not the same when you're a tech startup founder. When you're really successful as a founder, the company grows and scales at such a clip that at some point it outgrows you as a founder. And there are very few founders who are actually sitting in that seat as they go through an IPO process. There are very few. And I want to understand, for the few founder CEOs who've actually crossed that chasm of going public, like, what did they do, and what about them really allowed them to scale and grow and morph as the company needed them to operate very differently at those many stages of growth? That's the one thing that has been on my mind and obsessing. So if your audience actually tells me, Martin, that's not worth researching or writing about, do let me know. I would love some feedback on that. This is the first time I've actually verbalized this idea in a public space. So I am open to all the feedback.
Do you know, I'm going to enjoy this book, but I demand that book, because the downside with entrepreneurs, and a friend of mine actually brought this up, Jason, he actually called it ugly baby syndrome. As we are entrepreneurs and we grow, we think that no one can love that baby like we can. And we don't want it hurt. So we hold on to it. We usually end up suffocating it because of that. But as entrepreneurs, we think no one can do it like us. But as you've said, as the company starts getting momentum, you realize that you are inadequate to take it from here to there, and you need someone else. And it's a mind shift to be able to go, okay, I need to let it go now, because a lot of the time, there's a lot of ego attached to whether or not you're actually building the company or you feel as though you are the company. And we all know a lot of people that have sold their companies, and then there's a pain that they're no longer part of. They're sitting there with their private jet and their mansions, but they're no longer part of that company, their baby. They've been exiled from their family. I would love to understand that mindset on how to actually detach yourself from the ego and actually attach yourself to the intelligence and the strategy of making that as big as it can. I demand that book from you.
Done. I will write it. Go. Well, one thing to say, right? All the successful companies today, their most successful years were post the founder leaving the company. Wow. It's just the reality of growth. It's true of Google. It's true of all the big tech companies. It's true of all the Fortune. The company needs to outlive you, and its best years are going to be beyond your time there. And so the sooner you can realize that and set the systems in place to let your baby grow up and graduate and meet the real world, your legacy will live on much further than if you just held on tightly.
All right. Martin, I'm going to call you out on something now. All right?
Okay.
When you produce this second book, you let me know, and we'll do a podcast number 2. Fair?
Done.
There you go. Martin, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure. You've really kind of shaken up and stirred some of the things going through my noodles. So I'm hoping there's a few people out there going, I never thought of it as that angle. And for that, I thank you, because we all need to be aggravated a bit more often. Martin, thank you very much, and good luck with the book.
You're welcome. It was great to be here. Thank you, Steve.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. You know what to do. If you love it, share, subscribe, but more than anything, do something with it. And remember, life's too short to play it safe. So disrupt, connect, and grow. See you next time.